Katherine, welcome to London. So, as one of the world's best known climate scientists and working in this for a number of years now, what's the biggest thing that you've learned about communicating climate science?
One of the biggest things that I've learned is I think exactly what you've learned too, which is that when we first talk to people about an issue that we care passionately about, we assume that they would care about it too for the exact same reasons. And then when we realize they don't, then stage two is we think we have to make them care about it for the exact same reasons. And that doesn't work either. Finally, we arrive at stage three when we recognize that just about everybody already has the values they need to care about climate change. They may be very different than ours, but they already have them. Our job is to help them connect the dots between what they already care about and how climate change affects that exact thing.
Well, because it impacts people. Because we see, because we work in it, how much it's going to impact everyone.
Every aspect of human life on this planet.
So we assume everyone else gets that.
Exactly.
But they don't.
No.
And we have to help them. So don't we have to, I mean, the work I've done for the last 5 years with Carbon Tracker is translate the relevant bits of the climate science into the language of our audience, whoever they may be, but in the context of what they care about. i.e., how it impacts them. And that's kind of what you focus on. That's one of your
exactly what I do
research.
too, yes.
So how does it affect people? So these people sitting in the park here, how is climate change relevant to them? How is it going to impact their lives? You know, not just hundreds of years or tens of years in the future, but in this sort of immediate
already
future.
Today, it's affecting our lives. So one of the key ways that climate change affects us is the place where we live. We are seeing what used to be naturally occurring weather extremes become stronger and even in some cases more frequent as a result of a changing climate. So we know that the summer last year was unusually hot and dry. We know that cyclones and hurricanes and typhoons are getting stronger, with more rainfall associated with them, making more damages. We know that climate is changing, affecting our food supply, our energy, our water, even national security. But we also know that climate change is affecting things that we care about. It's affecting wine grapes. It's affecting coffee and chocolate and beer. It's affecting air quality and our health. It is affecting the economy and investments. So the most important thing to do with the conversation is to get to know the person that we're talking with, or the people, figure out what they already care about, and then help them connect the dots between that thing that they are already passionate about and why they already care about a changing climate. They just didn't realize it.
So here in London, we're in the beautiful Lincoln's Inn Fields in the heart of London. A little while ago here in London, over at the Easter period, we had a big sort of social change, if you like. The Extinction Rebellion. And we've also had the children's school strike started to take place here. Why do you think that's happening? Why are these people now getting out on the street, closing roads down, occupying bridges? Why do they now understand the relevance and feel that drastic action is required?
I think that a big part of our growing awareness is the fact that we are seeing the impacts today in the places where we live. 15, 20 years ago, you would have to maybe go to the Arctic or a low-lying island in the South Pacific to really witness the impacts of a changing climate with your eyes and how it was affecting real people. But today, we are seeing the impacts right here in the place where we live. And so when we see something strange happening, we think, well, why is this happening? Oh, the scientists are actually telling us, and they've actually been telling us for 100 years, that climate is changing and that our extremes are getting worse and that it's going to get even more worse if we don't wean ourselves off fossil fuels as soon as possible. So we are starting to connect the dots between our welfare, the future of human civilization on this planet, and the carbon choices that we are making today.
Well, it's funny, you mentioned the Arctic. I was with one of your well-known colleagues, Michael Mann, I think back in September, up in the Arctic in Svalbard, and he talked about the fact that what happens in the Arctic, unlike Vegas, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, and how warming in the Arctic was impacting severe weather events here in the UK, in America, and elsewhere in the world. Do you think that with those severe weather events, I mean, he really felt that people were beginning to understand the connection. Do you agree with that?
Well, we are seeing a huge shift in public opinion. In the US, this past year, they saw the biggest increase in number of people concerned about climate change that they had seen in over 10 years of polling. One of the main reasons for that increase is the fact that there have been disaster after disaster after disaster breaking records in the United States itself in places where people live, where their friends and their family live. But we're also seeing increased outreach and engagement by the scientific community. The 1.5 degree report was very unusual because scientists actually quantified the impact of the choices that we can make. What is the difference if we go for 1.5 versus 2 degrees? The U.S. National Climate Assessment was also published a month afterwards. It brought the impacts of climate change down to every sector and every region of the U.S. It said that if you live in Florida, here is what is already happening today with sunny day flooding in your state. If you live in California, here is how the drought risk in California has increased due to a changing climate. If you live in the western U.S., here's how many more millions of acres have been burned by wildfire as a result of a changing climate. It made it personal and it brought it home.
And do you think, so we're seeing the social tipping point, the Extinction Rebellion and children's climate strikes and more pressure. We're seeing a tipping point around people's realization that severe weather events are linked or turbocharged by climate. Do you think we're also seeing a sort of technological, business and economic tipping point? So, I mean, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
After 11 years of the very successful Climate Week in New York, London's decided to have its own version, the London Climate Action Week in July, the first one. And I think the organisers, for example, people like Nick Mabey at E3G and others, the Greater London Authority, GLA, have been taken aback by the demand. They thought they'd have 20 or 30 events. They've got over 100 events now in the pipeline, possibly more. Do you think that is, that is a sort of manifestation that this is economically, this is moving into the mainstream?
It is. I think that's a combination of the social and the economic tipping points. To give you another example, the city of Dallas hosted a North Texas climate change symposium a couple of months ago. They hosted it in Dallas at a very conservative location, the Law Club, and they expected maybe 100, 150 people. Well, there was only room for 350 people. It was sold out. They had to turn away 150 people in the heart of Texas. People wanting to talk about the impacts of a changing climate, how it's affecting our water, our cities, our energy, and more. So the interest is growing, but the economics are also coming into line. Because, of course, for years now, the price of solar and wind and alternative energy technologies has been dropping exponentially. New technologies are coming onto the market. They're testing tidal energy in Scotland. They're looking at modular nuclear in the United States. So we're seeing new ways to get our energy at the time when we most need them. And that is the third tipping point, the fact that now regular people can afford electric cars. It wasn't that way 20 years ago.
Yet in France, we've seen the Gilets jaunes and, out on the streets. But I guess on the other side of that equation, there's a lot of financial research out there showing that increasingly fossil fuels is having to be subsidised to compete with cleaner energy.
Yes.
Carbon Tracker did some work a couple of years ago showing that I think 78% of US coal-fired power plants were having to be subsidised to compete with clean alternatives, to the tune of something like $10 billion a year. In some US states, people paying an extra 10% to have coal-fired power.
Yes.
So why aren't those people out on the street saying, putting a yellow jacket on in Texas or wherever else in the US and saying, why am I paying an extra 10% for coal when I could have cheaper, cleaner energy?
Exactly. It's because of lack of awareness and very clever marketing. Coal is the way of the past. Many people want to cling to the past in a time of very rapid change. Coal is familiar. New energy technologies are strange and a little bit uncomfortable. But the biggest reason, I think, is that people are not aware. There is this common wisdom, conventional wisdom, that clean energy is heavily subsidized and fossil fuels are not. Whereas, of course, it's exactly the opposite. Fossil fuel subsidies far eclipse anything on solar or wind or other sources of clean technology. So I think there's a strong economic argument to be made among those who make those decisions, and we're seeing this actually happen. The Northern Indiana Power Utility, which is one of the biggest utilities in the United States that still uses coal, they announced that they're going to be phasing out coal much faster than they had originally planned because it would save consumers $4 billion US by doing so. So
there's lots of hope, but which is fantastic. So there's a lot of reasons to think that we can make the transition. But let's bring it back to the science and I think what we're up against. You have your own YouTube channel, I think Climate Weirding?
Global Weirding.
Global Weirding,
yes.
Okay. And you'd also done this amazing TEDx talk. But I think one of your recent videos from a month ago, if I'm right, talks about why 1 degree or 2 degrees of global warming is so significant, even though it seems like a small amount.
Yes.
So can we talk a little bit about that? I mean, what are we up against here? I mean, how serious is this to, our way of life, our civilization, our economies, and possibly, human existence itself?
Well, often 1 or 2 or even 3 degrees does not sound like a big deal because we think, well, there's a 3-degree temperature difference between the room that I'm in right now and the corridor outside. But the best analogy, I think, is to the human body.
Okay.
Imagine if our human body temperature went up and down from day to day and week to week, but over time it slowly increased to a permanent 1.5 degrees warmer. We would be running a permanent low-grade fever. Our body would change fundamentally as a result of that low-grade fever. And if we're running a 2 or a 3-degree fever, we're heading to the hospital possibly or a doctor because that's a significant fever. And people might say, well, but 1 or 2 degrees, why does that matter? Your body's already 37.5 degrees. It matters because it's the change. Over the course over the course of human civilization on this planet, we have never seen a change this large happen before. And all of our systems, our infrastructure, our cities, our buildings, our roads, our transportation, our health system, our agriculture, our energy, our water, our economy, our national security, all of that is predicated on the assumption of a stable climate. We have built our entire civilization looking backwards to the past at what climate conditions used to be like. There's a giant curve coming up ahead on the road. Our wheels are already on the rumble strip. We can hear the warning signs saying that we are heading off the road. We have to look ahead to plan for a different future, but we also have to do everything we can to wean ourselves off carbon as fast as possible because that will mitigate the steepness of the curve and help us make it around safely.
Yeah, if you have that sort of fever, 3-4 degrees, and you don't get it down, you don't go to a doctor, it doesn't bear thinking about. So we are facing potentially an existential crisis, hence the Extinction Rebellion. So how do we communicate that to people in a way that they understand the severity of the crisis we face, but they're not so psychologically scared and turned off that they bury their heads in the sand?
The way to do that is to communicate the risks that matter to us at the same time as we communicate viable, actionable solutions. Because if we talk about a problem but we don't offer a solution to it, then people say, well, if there's nothing I can do, why should I even pay attention? Our defense mechanism is just to pull the blanket up over our head.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's understandable, yes.
Of course it is, very understandable, yes. But if we are presented with things that we can tangibly do, from voting to talking to people about it, to making choices in our personal lives, to advocating for change in our institution or our organization or our town or our city, coupled with information on the risks and why it's serious, rather than freezing us, rather than paralyzing us, that empowers us to act.
So what can we do? What can the people watching now, what are they able to do?
Well, when I first started to get asked, what can we do? I thought to myself, well, I'm a climate scientist. I diagnose the problem. I don't figure out how we can fix it. I don't know, maybe change a light bulb or recycle, but that's not a satisfying answer. That feels like nothing. So then I thought, well, actually, individually, our carbon footprint comes from many different places. So individually, if we step on the carbon scales, we measure where our personal carbon footprint comes from, then we can make changes that are the most meaningful for our lives. But then I thought, even if all of us reduced our entire carbon footprint to zero who cared about it, that would only take care of a tiny fraction of the problem. We need system-wide change. And that's when I realized that the most important thing that every single one of us can do about climate change, no matter who we are, how old, where we live, is talk about it. Right. Because surveys have showed, for example, in the United States, that almost nobody talks about it. If we don't talk about something, why would we care? If we don't care, why would we act? So action begins with the conversation today.
You've got to make it relevant. I mean, I read you put it into you translated it from temperature, Fahrenheit or degrees C, into joules of energy. And in one of your videos, I can't remember which one it was, you said that we're putting the enough energy into the system every minute that's equivalent to 3 Hiroshima nuclear bombs.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if 3 Hiroshima nuclear bombs went off somewhere in the world, we would have a global crisis. There would be a massive political response.
Yes.
We're putting that much energy into our system every single minute.
Yes.
And we don't notice, because it is just the classic boiling frog syndrome, isn't it?
It absolutely is. So the videos that we're talking about are called Global Weirding, and they're on YouTube. You can find them. There's about 35 short episodes that talk about common questions. And then in my TED Talk that I just did in December 2018, it talks about how can we have these tough conversations about a changing climate without ending up like this, or without ending up just completely depressed.
So, well, here you go. We have already a collaboration between Green and Tonic and Global Weirding.
Yes.
So, subscribe to both, please, Global Weirding and Green and Tonic. Sometimes you do feel like you need a gin and tonic or a few.
Well, maybe next year we could do gin and weirding.
Thank you, Katherine. This has been an amazing
Thank you so
conversation.
much.
Really enjoyed it.